Today, I'm speaking with Nathan Calvin. Nathan is Senior Policy Counsel at the Center for AI Safety Action Fund. As part of that work, he helped shape a proposed AI bill in California, the very controversial Senate Bill 1047.
Why we can't count on AI companies to self-regulate.
Mark Zuckerberg in his testimony in front of Congress, said like, oh, I want to be regulated. And, it's a thing that you hear from lots of folks where they say, I want to be regulated. But then what they really mean is I want to be regulated in the exact way. Basically, I want you to mandate for the rest of the industry what I am doing now. And I want to just like self-certify that what I am doing now is happening. And that's it. That is, I think, often what this really is. And so there's some way in which it's like easy for them to support regulation in the abstract, but when they kind of look at it, and again, like I think there's some aspect here of, I think even within these companies of folks who care about safety, I think there's a reaction that says, I understand this much better than the government does. I kind of trust my own judgment about, how to manage these trade-offs and what is safe kind of better than some bureaucrat. And really it's ultimately good for me to just kind of make that decision. And there are like parts of that view that like I guess I can understand how someone comes to, but I just think that it ends up in a really dysfunctional place. It's worth saying like I am quite enthusiastic about AI and think that has like genuinely a ton of promise and is super cool. And part of the reason I work in the space is because like I find it extremely cool and interesting and amazing, and just think that like some of these things are just some of the most remarkable things that humans have created, and it is amazing. And I think there is just a thing here of that this is a collective action problem where you have this goal of safety and investing more in kind of, making this technology act in our interests versus like trying to make as much money as possible and release things as quickly as possible. And left to their own devices, companies are going to choose the latter. And I do think that you need government to actually come in and say that you have to take these things seriously and that that's necessary. And I think that if we do wait until a really horrific catastrophe does happen, I think you might be quite likely to get regulation that I think is actually a lot less nuanced and deferential than what this bill is. And so I think there's some level where they are being self-interested in a way that, that was not really a surprise to me. But I think maybe the thing that I feel more strongly about is that like, I think they are not actually doing a good job of evaluating their long-term self-interest. I think they are really focused on like, how do I get this stuff off my back for the near future and get to do whatever I want, and are not really thinking about what this is going to mean for them in the longer term. And I think that has been a little bit disheartening to me. I guess like one last thing I'll say here is I do think that there is a really significant sentiment among parts of the opposition that it's not really just that this bill itself is that bad or extreme, that when you really like drill into it, like again, it's kind of feels like one of those things where you like read it and it's like, this is the thing that everyone is screaming about. It's just like, I think it's like a pretty modest bill in a lot of ways. But I think part of what they are thinking is that like, this is, the first step to shutting down AI development, or kind of that like, if California does this, then lots of other states are going to do it. And that kind of, we need to like really slam the door shut on model level regulation, or else, they're just going to keep going. And I think that is like a lot of what the sentiment here is. It's like less about, in some ways, like the details of this specific bill, and more about the sense that like they want this to stop here, and that they're worried that if they like give an inch, that there will continue to be other things in the future. And I don't think that is going to be tolerable to the public in the long run. And I think it's a bad choice, but I think that is the calculus that they are making.
SB 1047's impact on open source models.
So just to clarify exactly the thing that is happening that we might think is good that could be hindered by the bill, I think it's something like there are some developers who build on open sourced models like Meta's Llama, and we might think that they're doing useful, good things by building on Llama. But if Meta becomes kind of responsible for what those downstream developers do with their model, they're less likely to like make those models open access.
Yeah, I mean, to be clear, like, this is not applying to any model that exists today, including like
Right.
Meta's release of Llama, I think 405B is the most recent one. And those are not models that are covered under this, and people can build on top of those and modify those forever. I think that model, the best estimates I've seen are that it costs actually well under $100 million to train, and that you also have, like, with the cost of compute going down and algorithmic gains in efficiency, like the most capable open source model that is not at all covered by this bill is still like increasing in capability quite a lot each year. And so I think that, again, these are all the ways in which I think that there have been folks in the open source community who really look at this and say there's quite a tremendous amount that you can do and build on it that is not even remotely touched by this bill. I do think there is just a difficult question here around, like, if you release a model that can be, like, let's say that there's, Llama 7, and they test it and find out that it could be used to, very easily do 0-day exploits on critical infrastructure. And, they install in some, guardrail to have it reject those requests. And again, this is also a problem for closed source developers, that these guardrails, I think, are not that reliable and can be jailbroken in different ways. And so I think this is a challenge that also exists for closed source developers. But if they just release that model and someone for a very small amount of money removes that guardrail and causes a catastrophe, for Meta to then say, like, we have no responsibility for that, even though our, model was used for that and really modified in what we believe is, like, I think, a very foreseeable way, that is an area where I think just people disagree. And I think that where they think that, it's just kind of so important for Meta to release the really capable model, even if it can be used to straightforwardly cause a catastrophe. And again, I do think it's important to say that, again, it is not strict liability. It is not saying if your model is used to cause harm that you are liable. It is saying that, like, you have to take reasonable care to prevent unreasonable risks. And exactly what the line of that and kind of what amount of testing, what amount of guardrails, what is sufficient in light of that are the types of things that people are going to interpret over time. And these are terms that are used in the law in general. But I do stand pretty strongly for the idea that for these largest models that could just be extremely capable, that saying you're going to put it out into the world and whatever happens after that is just in no way your responsibility. I do think that is just something that I don't think makes sense.
Why it's not too early for AI policies.
One thing that I want to emphasize is that one thing I like about liability as an approach in this area is that, like, if the risks do not manifest, then the companies aren't liable. Like, it's not like you are taking some action of, like, shutting down AI development or doing things that are, like, really costly. You are kind of saying that, like, look, if these risks aren't real and you test for them and they're not showing up as real and you're releasing the model and harms aren't occurring, like, you're good. And so I do think that there is some aspect of again, these things are all incredibly uncertain. I think that there are different types of risks that are based on, different models and potential futures of AI development. And I think anyone who is saying with extremely high confidence about when and if those things will or won't happen, I think is, not engaging with this seriously enough. And so I think that having an approach around kind of, testing and liability and getting the incentives right is really, I think, a policy that engages with this uncertainty. And I think is something that I think you can support, even if you think that it's, a low risk that one of these risks is going to happen in the next generations of models. Like, I think it is, like, really meaningfully robust to that. And I also just think that, like, there's this question of, like, when you have areas that are changing at, like, exponential, or in the case of, like, AI, I think there's actually, like, if you graph, like, the amount of, compute used in training runs, like, it's actually, like, super exponential. It's like, really, really fast improvement that if you wait to kind of try to set up the machinery of government until it is incredibly clear, you're just going to be too late. I think that, we've seen this bill go through its process in a year. There are going to be things even, in the event the bill is passed, will take additional time. Maybe it won't be passed and we need to introduce it in another session. Like, I just think if you kind of wait until it is incredibly clear that there is a problem, that is not the time at which you want to make policy in which, you're going to be really satisfied by the outcome. And so I just think that like policy making in the light of uncertainty, like that just like is what AI policy is. And you got to deal with that in one way or another. And I think that this bill does approach that in a pretty sensible way.
Yeah, I'm certainly sympathetic to policy seems to take a long time, and AI progress seems to be faster and faster. And so I'm certainly not excited about the idea of starting to think about how to get new bills passed when we start seeing really, really worrying signs about AI. Yeah, on the other hand, it feels kind of dismissive to me to say this bill comes with no costs if the risks aren't real. It seems like clear that the risk does come with costs, both financial and potentially like kind of incentive-y ones.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a question of, I think as I was saying before, of like the costs of doing these types of, safety testing and compliance things, I think are quite small relative to the incredibly capital intensive nature of training these models. And again, these are things also that we've like seen companies do, of like when you look at things like the GPT-4 system card and kind of the effort that they put into that, and similar efforts at Anthropic and other companies, like these are things that are doable. There's also something of like, I'm not going to buy insurance because there's not 100% chance that, my house will burn down or whatever. If you have a few percent risk of a really bad outcome, it is worth investing some amount of money to kind of prepare against that.
Why working on state-level policy could have an outsized impact.
If you're someone who wants to get really involved with politics in some state that doesn't have a big AI industry, I think there still are things that are pretty relevant in terms of conveying this expectation to companies that if they want to do business in a jurisdiction, that they have to be taking measures to protect the public and to be following some of the word of what they've laid out in these voluntary commitments. So I think that I think it's a underrated area that I would love to see more people get involved with. And it's really been, in some ways it's almost been like too much, but like that my experience kind of working at the state level versus at the federal level, that there just is, I think, really is just a lot more opportunity to move policy. And I, really think that it's an exciting area that I think more people should think about seriously.
Yeah, I'm curious about this like underrated thing. Is there more you want to say about what makes state policy particularly underrated that our listeners might benefit from hearing when thinking about, I don't know, policy careers?
I think one interesting thing that also kind of relates with another thing that I know some 80,000 Hours listeners care about is California passed ballot initiative Prop 12, which says that pigs sold in the state kind of can't be held in these really, awful, inhumane cages. And it included pigs raised out of state. And there were, lots of agricultural and pork lobbyists who sued California. And it went up to the Supreme Court. And the Supreme Court decided that California does have a legitimate interest in, regulating the products that can be sold in its state, including activities out of state. And so I do think that it's just a thing where there is often this reaction that like the industry actually needs to be within that state itself in order for state regulation to have any effect. But, there are questions about, it needs to be proportional and it can't be protection. Like, there are different things, and it was a close decision. But I think in general, states, I think, have more power than they themselves realize. And I think it's, there's some reaction of like, I'm a legislator in Montana or something, like kind of what am I going to do that's going to be relevant to AI policy? And it's like, you have companies want to offer a uniform product that's the same across states. I think there's some question of like when it's a smaller state, there is some level at which if you push too far, then they just do, maybe it's easier for a company to say they're not going to offer their product in Montana than it is in California. And so you need to, I think, based on your size. But I do think it's an interesting thing that like, I think states like New York or Texas or Florida, like very large markets. I think in some way, the reason why California is doing this, I think is actually in some ways more about like the size of the market than actually about the fact that we have the AI developers physically located in the states is, I think, where the power of this is coming from. And I think that's something that has not really been understood by a lot of the observers of this.